Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I am honored to welcome you to this important webinar commemorating the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. I am Dana Levinson. I will be your moderator today, and this event feels particularly personal to me. That's why I feel so honored to be here as a Jewish woman and as a journalist who has witnessed firsthand and has interviewed several female survivors from October the 7th. I feel like today, more than ever before, we have to bring attention to the security and safety of women of all faiths from around the world. Gender-based violence is the most urgent and pervasive human rights issue of our time. Violence against women and girls is not only a violation of fundamental rights, but also a barrier to equality, development, and of course, to peace. The numbers are staggering. Listen to this. 1 in 3 women worldwide, 1 in 3, experience physical or sexual violence in their lifetime. 187 women were victims of femicide in Canada in 2023, with 22 femicides in Israel last year. Most killings of women and girls are gender motivated. In 2022, close to 49,000 women and girls worldwide were killed by their intimate partners or other family members. This means that on average, more than 133 women or girls were killed every day by someone in their own family. It's outstanding. It's unbelievable. Globally, a woman was killed every 10 minutes in 2023. These figures are more than just statistics. They represent lives forever altered by injustice. And our purpose here today is not only to acknowledge these realities, but to inspire action. We all have a role to play in creating a world where every woman and girl can live free from violence, fear, and discrimination. This webinar is a conversation between two experts, Jay Rosenzweig and Rolene Marks, whose voices are central to this cause. Their insight will guide us as this event will serve as both a call to action and a beacon of hope. Together, we can turn our shared vision of a safer, more equitable world into reality. Thank you all for being here and for your commitment to this critical issue. The program is hosted and planned by a coalition of 5 national and local Jewish women's organizations: Canadian Hadassah-WIZO, National Council of Jewish Women of Canada and Toronto, Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism, Na'amat Canada, and Momentum Canada. We have hundreds of viewers on the call today from Canada, from Israel, from Europe, and around the world, either watching live or they'll be watching the recorded webinar. So I'd like to get right into this and introduce our first guests, who are both incredible. Jay, I'm going to start with you. Jay Rosenzweig is a man with many hats. He is a trained lawyer, a talented strategist, an executive team builder, human rights champ, environmentalist, successful tech investor. I can go on and on and on. The CEO of Rosenzweig and Company, a leadership advisory firm, author of the highly acclaimed annual Rosenzweig Report on Women for the past 19 years, and board chair of the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, dedicated to pursuing justice through the protection and promotion of basic human rights wherever they are threatened around the globe. He is a published author and contributor to several major global publications, including Time Magazine, Forbes, Globe and Mail, National Post, The New York Times, and the Jerusalem Post. I wasn't kidding. I could go on and on and on. Hi, Jay.
Hi, Dana. Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really an honor to participate in this important discussion on such a critical and urgent topic. I've dedicated, as you've mentioned, much of my work to advancing equality and dignity and safety for women, both in times of peace and in the face of conflict. Violence against women, as you say, is a global crisis that transcends all borders. It's exacerbated in conflict zones where women and children are really disproportionately targeted through forced displacement and psychological trauma and sexual violence. In Ukraine, for example, under Putin's Russification program, Women and children have been forcibly removed from their homes, enduring unimaginable abuse. In Sudan, we see the weaponization of sexual violence as a part of horrific genocide, with women and girls targeted in unimaginable ways by militias. In Haiti, armed gangs displace entire communities, and reports show systemic sexual violence against young girls. And as you say, Dana, here in North America, we're not immune to this crisis. Gender-based violence remains pervasive, particularly among Indigenous women and those living in poverty. And globally, October 7 stands out as a stark example of the atrocities women endure. As we know, during Hamas's brutal attacks, over 1,200 people were killed, 251 were kidnapped, and systemic acts of sexual violence, including rape and gang rape, were used as a weapon of terror. So in closing, I would say at the Raoul Wallenberg Center for Human Rights, we've been working to address these crises. Our team submitted sanctions recommendations in response to Hamas's sexual and gender-based violence. We've also written extensive reports and undertaken advocacy regarding the genocide and gender-based atrocities in Sudan, ensuring these crimes do not go unnoticed. Additionally, I should mention that we are collaborating on a groundbreaking report introducing kinocide, which is the targeted destruction of families as a humanity, and examining the gendered impact of such violence. Our team helped evacuate over 450 Afghans, primarily Hazara schoolgirls and their families, from Taliban-controlled Afghanistan. Meeting these remarkable young women, including brave activists like 15-year-old Naila Ibrahimi, has been profoundly inspiring and reminds us of the importance of action. So today, on the World Day Against Gender Violence, I'm reminded of Alexei Navalny's words, "You are not allowed to give up." That sentiment guides us as we confront these crises, work toward justice, and ensure that women everywhere can live free from violence and fear.
Thank you, Jay. And we are not going to give up. We are going to continue to fight this every single day. And today is just one example of that. And I'm going to bring in a real champion from Israel, Rolene Marks. Rolene is a freelance journalist, broadcaster, and keynote speaker, and published in numerous global publications. Marks is the owner of Rolene Marks Consulting, specializing in media, public relations, consulting on Jewish and Israel-related issues, as well as media training with both local and international clients. Rolene produces and presents, Modine and Beyond, a weekly English language show on Radio Modine. She is a co-founder of Lay of the Land, host of the Israel Brief on YouTube, co-founder of the South Africa Israel Policy Forum, and is the national spokesperson for the South African Zionist Federation. Rolene also volunteers for WIZO, is a member of the World WIZO Executive, represents World WIZO at the UN, Alliance of Civilization Sessions on Anti-Semitism, and is World WIZO's representative to the International Alliance of Women. Wow, that is also quite the bio. Hi, Rolene. Thank you so much for joining us today. We were just speaking before. You're in Israel, and tell everyone where you are right now.
Good evening. Well, it's good afternoon to everybody in Canada, and thank you for having me. So I just want to do a little bit of housekeeping. I am in my shelter. If some of you have seen the news, we do have reports of a possible ceasefire with Hezbollah. We are expecting that to possibly come through tomorrow, but we know our enemy, and we know that they will take advantage of any possible remaining time to fire as many rockets and missiles towards the center and the north of the country. Yesterday, we had between 250 to 300 projectiles launched at the north and the center, causing quite a significant amount of damage. From where I am in Modi'in, in the center of the country, we heard the boom in Moshav Rahadnia, which actually shook our building. So if there are sirens or alarms, I'm perfectly safe and will just stay here in my shelter.
Okay, well, you let us know if there's anything. Okay, we're okay. You let us know, and Jay and I have got it, and you can come in and out if you want, but you sound like you are safe where you are. So thank you for giving us that update. Fingers crossed, our hearts are with you and everyone in Israel, of course, tonight, and praying that you have a peaceful evening ahead. So, Jay, I want to start with this question with you because sexual violence against women is not new, as you were just listing the horrific acts in various countries. But it did come to the forefront after October 7th, where we did see the most horrendous crimes against women and sexual violence being weaponized at an unprecedented level. Now, if that precedent had been met prior, we didn't know about it the way we were made aware of it after October 7th. And you wrote in the Jerusalem Post that on October 29th, 2023, the UN Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, from whom we expected a strong condemnation of the October 7th crimes and an urgent call for action to free those abducted, said not a word about the matters expected. So where do you think the problem lies therein at the UN and how it has trickled down?
So for one thing, I think part of the silence or downplaying of these horrific attacks relates to political polarization, unfortunately, and fear of backlash, which is extremely sad and pathetic, but I think it's certainly a reality. We need to recognize as the community of nations the dangers of silence and the dangers of downplaying these kind of atrocities. Sexual violence as a weapon of war, as you alluded to, is a deliberate strategy aimed at terrorizing victims, breaking communities, and asserting power. And that will reverberate well beyond October 7th if not dealt with severely. On October 7th, Hamas carried out systemic acts of sexual violence, including, as I say, rape and gang rape, targeting women and children as a calculated tactic of war, and it can't be let to stand unabated, and we need to document each and every aspect of these crimes. The United Nations has not done nearly enough, like not even close. But we do have some reports coming out of the United Nations, and I alluded to this in the report as well in the Jerusalem Post, a report by Pramila Patten, which is very important to note. She is the Secretary General's Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, highlighted the brutal use of these crimes during the attack and against hostages, and such acts must be recognized as war crimes and prosecuted accordingly. So even though the United Nations has not done nearly enough, we need to leverage as much as we possibly can whatever has been said, and that report, I think, is absolutely key.
So Ms. Patton did come out with that report, but not until closer to the end of November, which was, everybody thought that's insane. We know there's video. We know what they did.
Yes.
We saw the
Yes.
horrendous crimes. So this lends me to my next question, Rolene, because part of it, Jay picks up on the political side, and I want you perhaps to talk about the media bias side. I know you're in Israel and the reporting that you're seeing is in Israel, but here in Canada, the media has been biased. And so I know that you are fighting the lack of reporting every single day with your Israel briefs on YouTube. They're fabulous. So that's your role in doing that. But I wonder, what would be your advice to everyone else trying to fight that, to bring awareness to the lack of information that we are getting around the world because of the bias? So, for example, there was denial, and a lot of media outlets were not even reporting on the sexual violence.
Well, first of all, I think what we have to realize, it's not just Canada that has experienced this profound media bias. And we've seen it certainly not just with the issue of mass rape and gender-based violence, or as I call it, a crime against humanity of a sexual nature. We've seen it with other aspects of the 7th of October as well. And from what I have experienced, covering the events of the 7th of October and the war from here in Israel, and at times going down to the communities, to the sites where these atrocities happened, is I think that for journalists and for channels, unless they were in those kibbutzim or at the Nova Festival in the hours and days following the attack, they have completely lost any empathy. They've completely lost any impetus to report and tell the truth. In fact, very close to the 1-year anniversary, the impression that I got from members of the foreign press, several of us went down to the sites with our government press office. We spoke to the spokesperson of Zaka, who had documented those horrific crimes with photographic proof, but still with the understanding that we have to respect the dignity of our women and girls. Having seen the footage myself of what has been presented to the International Court of Justice, but what I saw from the media certainly was a complete lack of empathy and almost a will to just tick off something on their to-do list that they had a deadline to meet. So this is the attitude that I've certainly seen from the press covering stories here on the ground. I think we also have, in legacy media, we have this creeping in of identity politics, and just like the United Nations and just like the feminist organizations, which I'm sure we're going to speak about in a few minutes, we have seen this political polarization. But as you can no doubt hear, I am from South Africa by my accent, familiar to many of you. And there is a very famous African proverb that you can fell an elephant with a mosquito. So I think for all of us, we have to realize, and I know it's very intimidating when we look at our numbers compared to the numbers that we seem to be fighting against, and just how trenched it is in the media, that we're not powerless, we are not voiceless. Whether it is sharing this webinar tonight, the recording of this with as many people as possible, whether it is organizing in groups and communities in as many languages as possible to challenge the media, to keep on and on and on, to become that mosquito that's irritating the ear of the big African elephant, despite the flapping away, to demand that journalists employ the ethics of good journalism. And wherever we can, we've also got the law. We have also got processes like ombudsmen around the world that are there to adjudicate. So we need to make use of the tools that are available to us. But I think every single one of us has power, whether it's me on YouTube with an Israel brief, or on radio, on television, or every single person watching that has a social media account and has friends, even if it's one or two that have a sympathetic ear or even a curious ear. We have got to challenge, and we have got to be vocal.
You know, Arlene, you bring up an incredible point, and so many advocates have been saying this for a year, which is our voices collectively do make a difference, and that even if we say just a little, each one of us, it does make a difference. It will resonate somewhere, somehow, as we saw, as Jay and I were just discussing about the report that finally came out. Even though it was 6 weeks later, it finally did come out at the UN. Now, that being said, we are hosted today by five women's organizations. And so collectively coming together is remarkable. So beautiful that these organizations have come together. What are some practical solutions that female organizations, women-led organizations can do right now that they can make an impact to bring awareness to gender-based violence against women?
I think, first of all, let's talk about what we can do around the event of the 7th of October, because I think that opens a door to talk about women's issues. Hold screenings of Screams Before Silence. Speak to other communities, minority communities. I heard you mention Indigenous communities. I know as somebody who has an affinity towards the Indigenous communities of Canada and the United States, how many of those women go missing and remain a mystery to the media. Join with these communities, join with allied communities to speak up for their women as well. When we start to build bridges and connections with other communities, and we start to show up as allies, even though many of us feel that we have stood for so many causes and now feel that so many don't stand with us, I think just that outreach makes a world of difference. When they feel heard, we can feel heard. This is a borderless crime. It is a crime that doesn't care about religions or social structures or anything. This is a crime that is imposed on women to deny us our dignity and to deny us basic human rights. And tonight is an absolute shining example of what we can do practically. And I think maybe the next event that you do is expand the tent to include women's organizations from our allied communities. This is not a political issue. This is a human issue. This is a humanitarian issue. And you have to be extremely polarized and extremely biased if you can't look at that and see that for what it is. I do agree with Jay that we've got the United Nations report, which we have to use to our advantage, but I also want to raise several other reports. We've got the ACRI report here in Israel, with this, which is the Association of Rape Crisis Centers, their report. And there is a report that a phenomenal group of women are currently working on, which has documented what was not documented in all the chaos. And it's important that people understand just how massive a crime this is, or this was, because it's still ongoing, because we still have 13 women captive in the dungeons of Gaza. And we have the phenomenal unit of Lahav 433 who are investigating this, the biggest crime of its kind in Israel, and to make use of the resources that we have here to speak to other communities and to speak to your communities.
So I do want to shift a bit to the report, because the International Alliance of Women Annual Report 2023-2024 was out. And Jay, I want you to perhaps comment on this if you can. It highlights a global advocacy effort promoting gender equality and human rights with access to education and healthcare. And of course, we know when girls are educated and they have access to healthcare, that ultimately their lives are much different. So it highlights collaborations with UN Women and UNESCO, over $1.2 million in funding, supporting 15 grassroots projects benefiting nearly 25,000 women. So awareness campaigns led to a 10% reduction in reported violence in focus regions, and new educational programs reached more than 8,000 girls. So that's very impressive. So it seems whatever they were doing, and the report found what they were doing, that we need more of that. We need more of that everywhere, particularly
Absolutely.
in the regions that you had mentioned at the beginning.
Absolutely. I want to circle back to the conversation and also comment on the report and the recommendations. Certainly, as I say, even in our own country, we're not immune to this problem, and it's typically, although we see violence against women in affluent societies as well, but it's even more pertinent when it comes to lower income families. So there's definitely a connection between women's rights and uh, uh, the freedom of women who have higher incomes, and that's part of why I do my Rosenzweig report, because there's definitely a connection between the safety of women and their ability to thrive economically. But to circle back on some of your earlier discussion, the denial that we've talked about from political points of view, from the United Nations, from the media, this denial, we have to understand the importance of how it dehumanizes victims, emboldens perpetrators, and mirrors the dangerous denial of past genocides. So confronting it is essential to achieving justice and preventing recurrence. So to Rolene's point about the mosquito and the elephant, the one thing that I feel that our community hasn't done enough of is leveraging off of the technology that we all have at our fingertips. I commend what we're doing today, and we need to push out this conversation broadly. But I feel that our community can do better when it comes to communicating online, and technology and the digital world we live in can often be a neutralizer, even if we're a very, very small rounding error compared to the rest of the world in ratio. So I think that's really, really important. Intersectionality is something as well that was brought up, and I think that is really a key, reaching outside of the Jewish community to find commonality with other communities. So, for example, Rolene mentioned the indigenous community. One way we can find common cause with them is to speak as one indigenous people to another. And I think that's a way of really resonating. I'm working on a Black Jewish alliance with Van Jones south of the border, who's been really great on this issue, and we've been advising one another on how to best collaborate with the Black community, which we've lost to a large degree, but it shouldn't be that way. We have so much in common with the Black community, and hip hop culture, as an example, back to my point about understanding how to communicate properly, including communicate properly to young people. I think that's a key because the young generation is really highly influenced by that culture. It's a very dominant culture. So one last thing I'll say before you jump in, Dana, is just as an example of my conversations with Van, he talks about the H's and the H's that we have in common with the Black community. One being they're discussed with Hamas. They look at Hamas as not freedom fighters, but freedom takers. The concept of hate, the Black community certainly can understand the dangers of hate. They agree that the Jews are entitled to a homeland. And fourth, the issue of hostages. The Black community can relate to hostages. They themselves were brought to North America, as an example, as hostages. So I think dialoguing outside of our community in the deepest ways possible can help to stem the tide in a different direction.
So there's two questions that are on my mind as both of you are talking about an online activism, let's just say, or advocacy. And I would venture that we don't have a lot of young people on the line. They're probably at school, whether they're in high school or they're in university. But as adults, as parents, perhaps we could have these conversations with our younger people in our homes about starting to sift through the information and also to contribute contribute to the information in a very positive, progressive way. And we need to start that communication. So I'm wondering if you have some dialogue you can share with some of us here, how we can create that with our younger people in our homes to start, because they're online 24/7.
Well, if I could jump in here.
Please.
First of all, I want to commend Van Jones for being an absolute unwavering ally to the Jewish people, especially in these difficult times. I see him consistently on air with his yellow ribbon for the hostages and also his blue pin for fighting anti-Semitism. And
Oh, by the way, I should add, he will be at the 80th anniversary of Auschwitz in January. So really his support is amazing. But sorry to interrupt. Go ahead, Rolene. Yeah.
But if you could convey to him that we in Israel, we see it, and we are so profoundly grateful for his allyship. I think, Dana, you touch on something very important, is reaching the younger generation. And for young people, issues of social justice are very, very important to them.
Okay.
And this is where I think we can also learn from the younger generation how best to communicate the information that we feel is relevant and needs to get out there. I think for young Jewish people, despite being so unbelievably overwhelmed by what they face on campuses and in the streets of cities around the world, and in Israel, we have been following very, very closely the events in Canada, in Toronto, in Montreal over the weekend, and around the world with extreme concern and absolute horror. And I know that this can be very intimidating for young people. But I think it's also important if they make a human connection to the story. People connect to stories. They might not connect to statistics and they might not connect to reports, but they always connect to stories. And for young people, especially our young people, the story of Naama Levi, who is their age, the story of Daniela Gilboa, the story of Lili Albag, of Karina, of those girls that are sitting being held hostage, that is something that they can relate to. The stories of teenagers, young people who, just like themselves, were social justice warriors who went to dance for peace, something they would do, they can connect to. Maybe an idea would be to adopt a hostage or adopt a victim and make those stories very personal. And when you personalize and understand a story, it makes it easier to share with others. It also humanizes us as a people at a time where dehumanization is so pervasive around the world. And I think it's a tool, it's an idea that can help them connect to their peers from other communities, from other minority communities, because they'll understand what it is like to be a minority community that faces being marginalized. You have to excuse my English sometimes. It's a bit of a muddle in the head with the Hebrew. But I think these are the small things that can make it very easy to get the message across. I think there isn't a young Jewish person around the world that did not connect with Hirsch Pauline Goldberg. May he rest in peace.
I agree with you. Yes, absolutely. And Rolene, Jay had said, you both were talking about the mosquito, and we do have incredible organizations involved here today. Absolutely incredible. I can tell you personally, they're incredible. And the women involved in these organizations know how to rally. And so perhaps we throw it back to the orgs and say maybe the takeaway could be coming up with campaigns to rally our community. Each one of them can do something to rally our community, whether it's signatures, whether it's voices, whether it's an online campaign. But these are incredible takeaways. So I appreciate both of you giving us such great and solid information to take away right now. And part of that lends me to my next question, which is really now talking about domestic violence, because we know it's pervasive. It's in every culture, it's at every age, every socioeconomic bracket, as Jay was talking about. It's different, perhaps, with some women who are at different levels of economics and their ability to go out and work and make their own money. Do you think culturally there is a huge difference between cultures and domestic violence, Jay?
Well, I'd say that sadly we see violence against women across a lot of different cultures, across all cultures, I should say, but certainly within the radicalized elements of some of the cultures, it's probably even more pervasive, and sadly we probably don't even see it, given the radicalized and closed nature of some of these, let's say, inner societies. But we unfortunately, I think, see it across all cultures. I'll mention from a domestic point of view that our Raoul Wallenberg Center has been not only working diligently on the international front, but we've also been granted leave to intervene in 2 upcoming Supreme Court of Canada cases, one addressing actually Canada's international obligations on women's rights. So it's a sort of a blending of domestic and international, and another involving child pornography, where many of the victims are girls. So our team is really developing a strategy, in addition to all of this, to combat the staggering rates of sex trafficking of women and girls in Canada, ensuring justice for survivors and accountability for perpetrators. But I want to rewind just for a moment on what Rolene mentioned, and this applies to the domestic problem as well as international, and specifically the issue of October 7 and post-October 7. There's nothing more important than storytelling, and I think we need to do a whole lot more of that. I'm also involved in some other programs. You may have heard of the artist Five for Fighting. He has this big song, Superman. So I've been working with him on what's called a Yellow Ribbon campaign, and I want to share that with everybody after the call. Basically, we want to do a campaign where a yellow ribbon will be tied around a tree in front of one's house, one's office, in parks, to bring greater attention to the problem and the urgency of the hostages. He's also written a beautiful song, which I'm happy to share with everybody, specifically related to the hostage crisis, which is very touching, and it was included in a Washington Post column very recently. I'm also on the issue of storytelling involved in a project called See the Good, where we've gotten celebrities like Geddy Lee, Michael Douglas, Mayim Bialik, to tell positive stories about societies across cultures in order to bring some more positivity into the ethos, which I think is very important in today's day and age as well. Rather than the sarcasm and anger with which people are speaking, which is understandable, but we need to influence in other ways.
So certainly that is, I mean, all of it sounds incredible, Jay. Unbelievable, actually. And maybe it will move the needle. We hope it will move the needle with all of it. But in terms of women and gender-based violence, what kind of responsibility, and maybe I'll throw this back to Rolene, what kind of responsibility do you feel that communities have and religious institutions have to protect women and young women and girls? Because we're not getting it at a government level at this point. We're just not. So where do faith-based institutions come in and community leaders come in.
Well, I can speak on behalf of WIZO, the Women's International Zionist Organization, as the country's most trusted women's organization, one of the oldest organizations, and we like to think of ourselves as the emotional first responders here in Israel. Certainly, the majority of the, we'll call it the social welfare type work, has been deputized to organizations like Na'amat, like WIZO, like other organizations. And I can speak from the Israeli perspective because our government has got so many different other priorities to focus on. And it's not just this government, it's successive governments, because we live in such a hostile neighborhood. So it is incumbent on us to be the safety net for women. And I want to touch on domestic violence, especially now during a time of war, because we see these numbers rise astronomically. We've just come out of a global pandemic where we saw a significant rise in domestic violence and gender-based violence because of people being forced into lockdown and those kind of situations. Now, in a wartime situation, you've got a profoundly traumatized country. I won't even say we are PTSD, I'd say we are TSD, because we're definitely not in the post phase and probably won't be for a long time. And when you've got this kind of trauma, very often in families in close quarters where there is no ability to blow off steam, that anxiety is taken out on their partners, their wives, the women, especially knowing what a lot of our men have had to witness either on the 7th of October or having to serve in the army or not serve and feel that sense of helplessness. So there is that to consider. But with regards to religious institutions, and here we've got such a prime example in Israel where we have so many different delicate scenarios that we have to navigate because of religion. Just as an organization, we've had to learn and adapt to work very closely with the rabbinut so that Haredi women who are enduring horrific abuse know that they can receive our help still within the framework of their religious structures. We also have had to adapt to dealing with the Arab community because their needs are different. So I think where countries can learn from Israel is to learn to see how we adapt and how we deal with issues around gender-based violence, understanding the particular delicacies of each community.
One thing I would, yeah, go ahead, Dana.
No, please. I was just going to bring you in.
Yeah, one thing I would say, I mean, the preface was about sadly governments not doing enough, but I think on the other hand, we can't give up on trying to influence governments, and part of it in democratic society is perhaps voting out governments that aren't doing enough. But governments must put gender-based violence at the forefront of their peace and humanitarian agenda. This includes targeted sanctions against perpetrators, international monitoring, survivor-centered aid such as medical care and trauma counseling, and accountability mechanisms to prosecute war crimes. So, you know, advocacy organizations like ours and others have to push for these measures, ensuring that survivors' needs are prioritized and justice is pursued.
How do we move, Jay, from, violence against women as a women's issue and make it more of a community issue, that it affects everyone? It's not just the woman who is experiencing the violence or the sexual violence. It is a whole family. And then those children go out into the world. It affects schools. It affects communities. It affects your job, your workplace. How do we move from it being just a woman's issue to a community issue?
That's a great point, and you sort of answered some of it in your own as part of your own question. But the bottom line is human rights advocacy has to be universal. As Hillary Clinton once said, women's rights is human rights. And if we want to live in a free and safe and secure society, we need to ensure that every single individual in our society is well protected. Because once you have a vulnerable people, there's a threat to all. There's a threat to all for so many different reasons, including desperation coming from those who are repressed. So I hopefully have been a little bit of an example as a man fighting for women's rights, including through my annual women's report for the last 20 years. And I always see it as a human rights issue, and an issue that should be tackled by 100% of our population, not 50% of our population. And frankly, I was made fun of early days, like when I began this report in 2006, like, hey, Jay, like, what do you care about this issue? You're a guy, like, why would you be focusing on this as your most important project? And I always said that this is a project which is societal in nature, and which needs to be looked at by all peoples at all levels, whether it's government, media, university levels, etc. And I always say that I will continue doing my report as an example until hopefully one day I work my way out of a job. The good news is,
Nice.
as regards gender equality in corporate Canada, women now hold nearly 12% of named executive officer roles in Canada's top companies, and that's an all-time high.
Yes.
And as I begin work on the 20th annual report, I remain committed to advancing equality, safety, and dignity for women and all peoples everywhere.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Jay. That's wonderful. I do want to mention to everybody watching this now, I didn't say this earlier, but we still have a little bit of time before we wrap up our last couple questions. In the chat, please feel free to talk amongst yourselves. If there are ways that you're thinking of community events or outreach or something, put it in the chat. Also, if you have some questions for Relina and Jay, they will see the questions afterwards as well, and hopefully they can get to you. We are a big global community, as we've been talking about, and we have to all do this together. So feel free to participate in that way. Relina, I want to ask you, with a little bit of hope, maybe not, but do you see that there will be an elimination of violence against women one day?
I think that hope is an imperative. We always have to keep our hope. And I just want to thank you, Jay, as a woman, as a Jewish Israeli woman, for being such a shining example. Because this is courage. This is an example. This is a passion that is contagious. And the reason that I have hope is because of people like Jay. Because of the many men that I have seen coming out and advocating for our women, the many, many men, Jewish, not Jewish, that I've seen across social media in this last year, standing with our women, realizing that they too are fathers, they too have sisters, they have wives, they have female family members, and the issue of gender-based violence and the issue of sexual violence against women isn't a woman's issue. It's a human issue. It's a human rights issue. And to see so many men standing beside us, advocating for us, some men more proud advocates than even women are, gives me hope. And Jay, I really, really hope we see you out of a job soon.
I know. I was thinking the same
I
thing. I
hope
thought,
so
oh,
too.
that'd be great. Jay,
But in
I
the
want to ask you.
meantime, women everywhere, from Afghanistan to Zimbabwe, owe you a debt of gratitude for being our voice in a world that so often silences us.
Jay, I
Thank
want
you,
to
Lily.
throw that to you. Are you hopeful? Do you see a world where there is the elimination of violence against women? That gender-based violence is gone. We don't have a world with that anymore. Are you hopeful?
I'm an optimistic person by nature, and I believe as the founder of our Wallenberg Center, Erwin Kotler, always told me as a student that when I asked him what we can do in a world that can often make us feel cynical or even indifferent, when I asked him that question, he urged me to heed the words of the great sage Maimonides, who suggested we look at the world as if it is half good and half evil. And if we look at it that way, then one good deed could tip the scales from evil to good. And so, in that sense, we all have, as he says, and as I now tell my children, a cosmic opportunity, whether it be in helping a person to cross the street or helping a friend with homework or calling a grandparent to say hi. We all have a cosmic opportunity to tip the world and to tip the scales for good. So each and every one of us has to do our part with positive, good deeds each and every day, at least one, and we'll bring the light that will extinguish the darkness.
Beautiful, Jay. Thank you. Raylene, I want to end with my last question to you, which really, it's not a question, perhaps it's something that you can provide for all of us. We, as women and as men, we think about the hostages every day. We pray for them every day. We, particularly on this day, we are praying for 13 girls that are there, women, girls that are there. Perhaps you can end with a comment or two about how people are feeling in Israel about the girls in captivity, your feelings on it right now.
I'm going to try and get through this without crying.
Okay,
There is not a morning that I don't wake up and my first thought is of our hostages. And I don't take for granted that I'm lying in a bed safe and that my husband is next to me, because for 101 families, this is not the case. For so many families, they sit every single day in an anxiety that we cannot possibly comprehend, but with a superhuman strength to get through each day and fight for their loved ones to be returned home to them, whether it be for burial, for a place where they can be buried with dignity and be laid to rest, or whether we can bring them home and embrace them as a nation and help them on their road to recovery. I think it's very important that we do not forget that this is not just a crime against Israelis or Jewish people. This is a crime against Jewish people, Muslim people, Druze, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, and atheist from over 20 different countries. As the plight of our hostages fades from the world's consciousness, we appeal to all of you, please be the voices of our hostages. We know from the testimonies of former hostages what our women are enduring, our women and little girls, and some of the males as well. We know that they have been sexually violated, that this continues to be a daily occurrence for them. We know from physicians who have worked with the hostages the effect that 416 days of captivity has had on their bodies. We are in winter here in Israel. It is cold. It is wet. They are held underground without oxygen, without food, possibly losing over 50% of their body weight. The impact on their as their psyche, on their mental health, must be something that we cannot even fathom. Please, 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 don't let your government, don't let, whether it be federal or local, don't let communities, don't let the world forget that there are 101 hostages. We need them home now. We are a devastated nation, deep in trauma, and I think unless we get these hostages home, this will be a wound that will never, ever heal.
Thank you, Rolene. Thank you so much. And of course, we're wishing you safety tonight as you're hunkering down still in your safe room. And as we come to a close of this webinar, I want to thank each one of you for your time and your commitment to this today. It is an urgent issue. Violence against women is an urgent issue. As Rolene was just speaking about, as Jay remarked so well in today's discussion, I hope was enlightening and inspiring for everybody. And it's reminding us of the gravity of this global issue for sure. And we've heard from voices that matter, Jay and Rolene, a huge thank you for sharing your thoughts today and your opinions and giving some solutions. I think that these are incredible takeaways for all of us today. The International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women is more than just a date on the calendar. It is a call to action for every one of us to commit to change, whether through advocacy, education, policy making, or simply by speaking up when we see injustice. And remember, every step we take, no matter how small, contributes to the greater goal of a world where women and girls live free from fear and harm. And as we leave here today, let's carry the lessons learned, the story shared, and the inspiration ignited into our communities and workplaces. Let's turn words into action. Finally, ensuring this conversation doesn't end here, but becomes a catalyst for real and lasting change. And of course, I want to thank the organizations, Canadian Hadassah-WIZO, National Council of Jewish Women of Canada and Toronto, Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism, Na'amat Canada, and Momentum Canada for organizing this program. Thank you again, everyone, for your participation, for your passion, for your unwavering commitment. Together, hopefully, we will bring our hostages and our girls home, and we will build a future with equality and dignity and safety for every woman and every girl.
Thank you, Dana. And thank you,
Thank
Rolene.
you, Dana.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
Jay. Thank you, everybody.
Stay safe, Rolene. Stay safe.